Hello and welcome. You're watching News Night and I'm Sakal Bhatt. A month after seizing Kabul, the Taliban is now facing a daunting task or daunting set of problems as it seeks to convert its so-called victory into some sort of durable government by urging, requesting, reaching out to international community to restart aid and hence help in rebuilding Afghanistan and its beleaguered economy that is in ruins as we speak. But on Wednesday, US put Pakistan ties under scanner, exposed its involvement of harboring members of the Taliban, the terrorists, including the proscribed Haqqanis. In Newsnight tonight in Focus, we examine Blinken's hard line on Pakistan for aiding Taliban terror and its multiple ramifications. But first up on Newsnight, here are the headlines. US puts Pakistan on map for harboring Taliban terror, warns will reassess ties with Pakistan. US administration exposes Pakistan's double speak, says Islamabad supports Taliban terrorists while professing to help Washington in Afghanistan. Protest demonstrations meanwhile spill over the streets of Afghanistan. Taliban administration reaches out to international community for aid to rebuild beleaguered economy. Meanwhile, reports of fiction emerge between Haqqani and Baradar faction. India lashes out at Pakistan for misusing UN Human Rights Council platform to propagate its false and malicious propaganda against New Delhi. India says Pakistan has failed to protect rights of its own minorities. Hence, Pakistan should not lecture India on same. As a force multiplier for Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India vision, government approves production-linked incentive scheme for auto and drone industry to enhance manufacturing capabilities. Scheme poised to generate more than 7.5 lakh job opportunities. Also scheme poised to transform India into a bigger and robust global player in automotive sector. Union Cabinet approves 9 structural and 5 procedural reforms in telecom sector. Reforms to promote healthy competition, protect interests of consumers, infuse liquidity, encourage investment, reduce regulatory burden on telecom service providers. Also reforms to encourage 100% FDI. Prime Minister calls it a watershed moment for the telecom sector. Disturbing details of huge conspiracy emerge after interrogation of 6 youth arrested by Delhi police on Tuesday. Youth were part of an ISI-backed terror module in Pakistan, were planning to target locations in Delhi, UP, Maharashtra, sent to 14 days judicial custody. Rajya Sabha Chairperson M. Venkaiah Naidu, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla jointly launched Sansad TV, a merger of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha TV channels. Sansad TV will showcase the democratic ethos and the functioning of democratic institutions in the country. Prime Minister says Sansad TV will add another important chapter in India's parliamentary system. Doordarshan completes 62 glorious years. Started as a platform for educational and developmental programs, it now has a bouquet of 36 channels. Prime Minister congratulates the Doordarshan network. And now for the top story in detail. The Union Cabinet meeting chaired by the Prime Minister Modi on Wednesday took significant decisions, including a relief package for debt-strapped telecom companies and PLI for auto companies. The production-linked incentive, that is the PLI scheme for the automobile sector, it aims at promoting domestic manufacturing and also creating mammoth job opportunities. Here's a detailed report. In tandem with government's major national program like Make in India to foster innovation and investment, and also as a force multiplier for Atmanirbhar Bharat, Prime Minister Modi's vision of making India a self-reliant nation, government in a significant decision on Wednesday approved production-linked incentive or PLI scheme for auto industry and drone industry to enhance India's manufacturing capabilities. PLI Auto Scheme will incentivize emergence of advanced automotive technologies global supply chain in India.
Production link incentive scheme for auto industry, auto component industry, drone industry to enhance India's manufacturing capabilities.
Under the scheme, incentives worth Rs 26,058 crore will be provided to industry for over 5 years. PLI scheme for auto sector will also pump in fresh investments of over 42,500 crore over the span of 5 years. PLI scheme will also infuse incremental production of over 2.3 lakh crore. PLI scheme for drones will pump in fresh investments of over 5,000 crore in 3 years. And scheme for drones will also see incremental production of over 1,500 crore. PLI scheme for automotive sector, along with already launched PLI for advanced chemistry cell and faster adoption of manufacturing of electric vehicles, will give a big boost to manufacturing sector while enabling India to leapfrog into environmentally cleaner electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles.
भारत ऑटोमोबाइल सेक्टर में ग्लोबल प्लेयर बन सके और जो लेटेस्ट टेक्नोलॉजीज दुनिया भर में है उसका भी हम उपयोग कर सकें। आज जितने ऑटो कंपोनेंट विदेश से आते भी हैं उसका भी निर्माण देश में हो। आत्मनिर्भर भारत और मेक इन इंडिया को बल देने की जब हम बात करते हैं तो उसमें इसका लाभ मिलेगा।
The PLI scheme is also poised to give a big push to employment sector by generating additional jobs for over 7.6 lakh people.
ड्रोन पर मैं एक बार आपको कहना चाहता हूं क्योंकि बिल्कुल नई फील्ड है। एक तरह से स्टार्टअप्स होंगी, एमएसएमईज इसमें होंगी, एमएसएमईज होंगी। तो इस इंडस्ट्री को भी हम दुनिया की ओर देखने की बजाय हिंदुस्तान में ही इसका निर्माण हो, इसके लिए हमने कहा है कि जो इंडियन एमएसएमईज और स्टार्टअप्स हैं उनका मिनिमम एनुअल सेल्स टर्नओवर जो पीएलआई के लिए है वो ड्रोन के लिए 2 करोड़ का रहेगा और कंपोनेंट के लिए 0.5 करोड़ रहेगा और इंडियन नॉन एमएसएमई है उसके लिए ड्रोन का 4% रहेगा, 4 करोड़ रहेगा और कंपोनेंट का 1 करोड़ रुपया रहेगा।
It may be noted that PLI scheme for automobile industry and drone industry is part of the overall announcement of PLI scheme identified for 13 sectors made earlier during the Union Budget 2021-22 with an outlay of 1.97 lakh crore rupees. Both schemes are pitched not only to address the strategic, tactical and operational uses of this revolutionary technology, but also to transform India into a bigger and robust global player in automotive sector. With inputs from Bureau, News 9 Desk for DD India. Also, in a significant development, the Union Cabinet chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister, in fact, today, that's on Wednesday, approved a number of structural and process reforms in the telecom sector. Specifically telecom sectors, these are expected to protect and generate a lot of employment opportunities, promote healthy competition, protect interests of consumers, also infuse a lot of liquidity, encourage investments and reduce regulatory burden on the telecom service providers. Now, in principle, on Wednesday, Cabinet has approved 9 structural reforms and 5 procedural reforms. Now, let's take a look at these structural reforms and procedural reforms in detail. Reforms in the telecom sector, we can start playing out those graphics for you. Now, first we talk about the structural reforms. Structural reforms talks about the rationalization of adjusted gross revenue. And also, it includes bank guarantees, that is the BGs are also rationalized, which means no requirements for multiple bank guarantees are needed in different licensed service areas in the country or the regions. Number 3, the third procedural reform includes interest rates. These interest rates have also been rationalized, which means all the penalties have been removed. And moving on, which means for auctions in near future, no bank guarantees agencies are required to secure any sort of installment payments as well. It also, let's move on, it talks about the spectrum tenure, which has been now increased from 20 to 30 years. Initially it was 20 years, now this has been increased to 30 years for future auctions, and also talks about the surrender of spectrum permitted after 10 years in future auctions. It also talks about no spectrum usage charge, that is SUC, that is not acquired in future spectrum in future auctions as well. Also, the telecom reforms are going to put a lot of focus on the spectrum sharing. Spectrum sharing will be encouraged henceforth, and most importantly, this is seen as a big move in terms of encouraging 100% FDI, that is foreign direct investment. Now let's move on. These were the structural reforms, at least 9 of them that were approved by the cabinet. Now, what are the process reforms or the procedural reforms? First one being the auction calendar has now been fixed, which means that the spectrum auctions will be held normally, and this is going to be held in the last quarter of every financial year. The other process of procedural reform is about ease of doing business. Basically, that is something which the government wants to promote, which means cumbersome requirements of licenses have been finally done away with. They have been removed. This has been replaced with the self-declaration. The third part being know your customers. You know, your KYC reforms. It's KYC reforms. Now it says self-KYC application base will be permitted, making it more easier for the consumers, which means you can shift from the prepaid to postpaid and also vice versa. All this will not really require your fresh KYC. Number 4, paper customer acquisition forms or CAF will be replaced by digital storage of data. Basically, it expedites the entire process. Also, the SAC-FA clearance for the telecom towers has been eased, which means that the portals of other agencies, for example, civil aviation, etc., they will also be linked with the Department of Telecom portal. So basically, this was a quick explainer on the procedural and structural reforms that were in fact announced by the Union Cabinet today. Well, on Newsline tonight, we are going to take a very short breather. When we come on the other side, we will talk about the In Focus tonight, the latest in Afghanistan, where the Taliban government reaches out to the international community asking for aid to resurrect its beleaguered economy. But the talking point tonight, big hard line, big statement coming from Blinken. On the other side, we'll talk about the repercussions of it.
संघर्ष जिसकी ताकत बना।
रेलवे से रॉयल पैलेस जिंदगी का रास्ता बड़ा कठिन होता है।
जिसने बचपन से तप को साधा।
सबकी चाय मोदी की चाय।
हम तो गरीब के घर पैदा हुए हैं, हमने गरीबी देखी है।
जब हम छोटे थे, आप कल्पना कर सकते हैं कि एक माँ ने अपने बच्चों को बड़ा करने के लिए कितना कष्ट उठाया।
नया भारत बनाना है संकल्प जिसका।
मेरी सरकार का एक ही धर्म है, भारत का संविधान। मेरी सरकार की एक ही भक्ति है, भारत भक्ति। मेरी सरकार की एक ही पूजा है, 125 करोड़ देशवासियों का कल्याण।
बड़नगर से विश्व मंच तक का सफर, कहानी एक जननायक की।
नरेंद्र दामोदर दास मोदी।
देखिए विशेष कार्यक्रम 16 सितंबर रात 9 बजे।
Well, thanks for staying with us on DD India. You're watching News Night. Well, Taliban government has reached out to the international community to restart its aids amidst massive liquidity crunch, while urging the international community not to politicize this assistance. Now, expressing their appreciation for the countries that pledged humanitarian support to Afghanistan, they're also saying that they will coordinate with them. However, also comes a veiled warning that they do not want, the Taliban do not want any nation to pressure Afghanistan, because pressure, according to them, does not work. Meanwhile, Taliban have also denied rumors of death of their former head and Deputy Prime Minister of Afghanistan, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, that he has been killed in a shootout with rivals. They have completely denied the reports. Here's more.
Within a month since taking control over Afghanistan and days after forming the interim government in the country, Taliban called for international donors to restart aid. Notably, a majority of international donors, including the United States, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, have cut off Afghanistan's access to funds after Taliban returned to power. This has resulted in a widespread liquidity crunch in the cash-dependent economy. Afghanistan is heavily reliant on external assistance after 4 decades of near continuous war. Afghanistan's acting foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi said that the international community should not politicize their assistance.
Afghanistan has been a war-torn country for the past 3 or 4 decades. It has seen destruction and troubles of all sorts. It has been hit by bombs and missiles. It needs the international community's assistance in different sectors, especially education, health and development. We want good relations with the international community. We want mutual relations. We demand the international community not to put any further pressure on the Afghans.
European Union chief Ursula von der Leyen has vowed to boost humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. In a tweet, she pledged the 27-nation bloc stands by the Afghan people. Speaking at her annual State of the European Union address, she tweeted that EU must do everything to avert the real risk that is out there of a major famine and humanitarian disaster. And EU will do its part. It will increase again humanitarian aid for Afghanistan by 100 million euros. Earlier this week, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that poverty and hunger have spiraled in the country since foreign aid dried up, raising the specter of a mass exodus. The UN appealed for $606 million to meet the most pressing needs of a country in crisis. Meanwhile, the Taliban have denied rumors of death of their former head and Deputy Prime Minister of Afghanistan, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, being killed in a shootout with rivals. A Taliban spokesman, Suhail Shaheen, said that Baradar has issued a voice message rejecting claims that he had been killed or injured in a clash. The denials followed days of rumors that supporters of Baradar had clashed with those of Sirajuddin Haqqani, who heads the Haqqani network that is based near the border with Pakistan and was blamed for some of the worst suicide attacks of the war. Baradar had not been seen in public for some time and was not part of the ministerial delegation which met Qatari Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani in Kabul on September 12th. Bureau Report, DD India.
And on the international front, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has pushed back against harsh Republican criticism of handling of the military withdrawal from Afghanistan during a congressional hearing. He has said the Biden administration inherited a great deal with the Taliban to end the war, but no plan for carrying it out. Blinken also said that the U.S. administration will review its ties with Pakistan in light of Islamabad's support for Taliban terrorists while professing to help Washington in Afghanistan. In fact, in the first public hearing in Congress about Afghanistan since last month's collapse of the US-backed Afghan government, Blinken told House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee that Pakistan has a, and I quote, multiplicity of interests, some that are in conflict with ours, unquote.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that US will be looking at its relationship with Pakistan in the coming weeks to formulate what role Washington would want it to play in the future of Afghanistan. In the first public hearing in Congress about Afghanistan since last month's collapse of the US-backed Afghan government, Blinken told the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee that Pakistan has a multiplicity of interests, some that are in conflict with those of the US. He added that Pakistan is one that's involved in hedging its bets constantly about the future of Afghanistan. Pakistan is the one that's involved harboring members of the Taliban while also being involved in different points of cooperation with US on counter-terrorism. Asked by lawmakers if it is time for Washington to reassess its relationship with Pakistan, Blinken said that the administration would soon be doing that. He said, "This is one of the things that we are going to be looking at in the days and the weeks ahead. The role that Pakistan has played over the last 20 years, but also the role we would want to see it play in the coming years and what it will take for it to do that." Pakistan has had deep ties with the Taliban and has been accused of supporting the group as it battled the US-backed government in Kabul for 20 years. It is also considered as one of the two countries, along with Qatar, with the most influence over the Taliban and a place where many senior Taliban leaders were thought to have escaped to after the US-led invasion of Afghanistan in 2001. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State also told the Congress that the United States is in touch with India regarding the over-the-horizon capabilities and plans. The so-called over-the-horizon capabilities US President Joe Biden has repeatedly touted make identifying and striking terrorists with aerial surveillance and drones launched from outside the country. When asked whether the Biden administration has reached out to India as a possible staging area for future over-the-horizon forces capabilities, Blinken said that the Biden administration is deeply engaged with India. The Biden administration's over-the-horizon strategy in Afghanistan is drawing serious questions from lawmakers and counter-terrorism experts as the US withdrawal shifts calculations about threats and capabilities. United States President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi will meet later this month in a first in-person Quad leaders meeting in Washington. Bureau Report, DD India.
Meanwhile, in a scathing response to Pakistan and Organization of Islamic Cooperation over their statement, India has lambasted Pakistan for habitually misusing the platform provided by the UN Human Rights Council to propagate its false and malicious propaganda against New Delhi. Exercising its right to reply in response to the malicious and baseless statements made by Pakistan at the 48th session of the Human Rights Council, India retaliated and exposed Pakistan for its hollow commitments to human rights.
Pakistan has failed to protect the rights of its minorities, including Sikhs, Hindus, Christians and Ahmadiyas. Thousands of women and girls from minority communities have been subjected to abductions, forced marriages and conversions in Pakistan and its occupied territories. Pakistan has been engaged in systematic persecution, forced conversions, targeted killings, sectarian violence and faith-based discrimination against its ethnic and religious minorities. Enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, murders and abductions have been used as a tool for subjugation and to muzzle any form of dissent or criticism.
And pointing out at a failed state like Pakistan for being the worst abuser for human rights, India said that the country has been globally recognized for openly supporting and training of terrorists and has failed to protect rights of its minorities.
Pakistan is a country which has been globally recognized as a country openly supporting, training, financing and arming terrorists, including the UN proscribed terrorists, as a matter of state policy. India, as not only the world's largest democracy, but a robustly functional and vibrant one, does not need lessons from a failed state like Pakistan, which is the epicenter of terrorism and worst abuser of human rights.
And in Newsnight tonight in Focus, we talk about United States putting Pakistan on mat for harboring Taliban terrorists, for harboring terror. Will US review its ties in view of the Pakistan's double dealing or double speak as claimed by Secretary Blinken? And ties with Pakistan are going to be under review over Afghanistan. That's what US says. And to do so on Newsnight tonight, we're very glad to be joined by former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, Ambassador TCA Raghavan with us. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much. And very also glad to have Sushant Sarin, Senior Fellow RF and Strategic Affairs Expert, joining us on Newsnight. Ambassador Raghavan, what do you make of Blinken's hardline so-called and the repercussions of it? Will we get to hear a sort of response from Imran Khan? And well, he's talked about Haqqani. He's in a way told Pakistan that stop your double speak, but then what happens next?
Well, I didn't think that the statement was anything very significant, because such statements have come from the United States on a number of occasions in the past. And in fact, in our experience, they have not really translated into tangible steps. If you recall, President Trump 3 or 4 years ago had come out with this very famous tweet on New Year's Day. Earlier, Secretary of State Clinton had also made very strong statements. But the fact is that the US has been for a long time in a bind vis-a-vis Pakistan because of its troops on the ground in Afghanistan. On the one hand, they needed Pakistani cooperation. On the other hand, Pakistan saw its long-term interests as making sure that the US purpose in Afghanistan did not succeed. So this contradiction has been there for a long time. I think what the Secretary of State said recently is partly to do with the enormous criticism which it has faced on account of what happened in Afghanistan last month. And this criticism is both a domestic political factor in the United States, as also has reverberated across the world.
Sushant Sareen, would you agree or disagree with Ambassador Raghavan? Another hogwash, just mincing words, or there's more to it?
I think we'll have to wait and see. I tend to agree with what Ambassador Raghavan has said about how the Americans have said certain things in the past, but not really followed through. Now, whether it was because of the compulsions which Ambassador Raghavan has counted out, or it was, I don't know, I haven't been able to really figure this out, because it doesn't make any sense. You know, you have a very vulnerable country like Pakistan, economically, politically, diplomatically, and you have a superpower like US, which has a lot of leverages over a country like Pakistan. And yet, instead of using those leverages, all that we heard were exhortations to the Pakistanis to do more, which the Pakistanis never did. The Americans knew for 20 years that the Pakistanis are not delivering. And now we have a statement from Secretary Blinken where he says that, you know, going forward, we want to see what is the role that Pakistan needs to play and how do we get it to play that role. Now, does this mean that they will continue doing what they've been doing over the last 20 years, even longer, which is to keep, you know, throwing good money after bad in Pakistan, hoping that that will change its behavior? Or will they this time turn the screws and force Pakistan or force compellence on Pakistan? I think that we need to wait and see.
Okay. Ambassador Raghavan, was it more of a pandering to your own constituency, putting your own house in order to your audience, rather than sending across a message to Pakistan or, for that matter, global community, because of what you know, the Biden administration's troops withdrawal in the face of a lot of global criticism?
I think the problem is really quite complex from the US point of view. While Afghanistan has been a high priority in US foreign policy, it is not the only priority, and it is also not and never has been the most important priority. With Pakistan, the United States has to balance a number of interests, because Pakistan is the 5th or 6th largest country in the world. It has nuclear weapons, as your report brought out. It has for many years now been a site where all kinds of radical groups have had freedom to operate, and that poses a threat to US interests. So it requires cooperation from the Pakistani agencies from time to time. So it has to balance these different interests vis-a-vis the situation in Afghanistan. And in balancing this interest, I think the United States faced an uphill task and ultimately failed in able to get Pakistan to do what it wanted it to do. The problem is that the much higher priority for Pakistan than it ever was for the United States. And I think that mismatch has led to this kind of situation. And I think what the US Secretary of State was now saying is partly, I think, to address the criticism which is being made of US policies in Afghanistan, but partly also possibly to put pressure on Pakistan to see whether they can now secure greater cooperation and more purposeful cooperation than in the past. Although I personally would doubt very much whether something will come out of it.
Okay, interesting point there, but does this really put pressure actually on Pakistan? When Blinken says, and I quote, multiplicity of interest, including some that are in clear conflict with that of United States of America. Well, is this now US has, the realization has dawned upon Sushant Sareen on United States to make an announcement of this sort? Will this put any pressure on Pakistan? Will it actually isolate Pakistan and its harboring of Haqqanis and the rest of the Taliban terrorists?
No, I don't think so, because until and unless the Americans are ready to turn the screws, I don't think there will be any change in the Pakistani behavior. Look, the thing is that every country has multiplicity of interests, okay? For example, a lot of our interests are in convergence with the United States, and a lot of our interests are not in convergence with the United States. But we are not, shafting the United States. We are not getting its people, soldiers killed. We are not kidnapping its citizens. We are not doing all sorts of other shenanigans which the Pakistanis would. So that is one point of difference. The other is that, look, yes, I agree with Ambassador Raghvan that Pakistan is a big country. It has a number of, it is a nuclear weapons power and all of that other stuff, right? But then my question is, do the Russians not have similar attitudes? It's the largest country land-wise. It's one of the biggest countries in the world population-wise. It's more than a nuclear power. It's almost a superpower in some ways. It has an economy which is 4 times the size of Pakistan. It is an energy-rich place, all sorts of other things, right? And yet, the Americans, when they came down to it, imposed absolutely severe sanctions on the Russians. Let's look at Iran. Iran is not a spring chicken. Iran has one of the largest populations in the Middle East. It's a very strategically importantly placed country. It has oil reserves. It has a very intelligent population. All sorts of other things going for it, right? And yet, for 30 years, the Americans, and over the last 4 years, the Americans have really turned the screws on the Iranians. Now, both these countries, Iran and Russia, could survive some of the sanctions which the Americans have put on them because of their other attributes. I am not so sure Pakistan can handle that pressure. So I think that is why I say that Pakistan is an extremely vulnerable country. If the Americans really want to address this issue, it will not take very long for them to really have the Pakistanis deliver on everything that the Americans want them to deliver on.
Provided they want it, provided they walk the talk. Yes, and why should they not do it? I mean, run up to the events that we've seen in the world has seen in the last 2 months. Pakistan, you have former Afghan Vice President Saleh alleging that Taliban are being micromanaged by ISI. If you remember the kind of statements that came from Imran Khan, and now this. I mean, there has to be some line drawn as far as Pakistan's alleged involvement with the terror Taliban networks are concerned, or is this they're just going to walk out freely once again this time, Ambassador Raghwan?
Well, I would think that the United States view on Pakistan is much more nuanced and much more complex than the way they see Iran or Russia. There is a very large element in the United States strategic community which feels that with cooperation, Pakistan can also play the role of an ally. I think that sense has never really weakened in American foreign policy thinking, and that is the reason why I think the United States has never applied the kind of pressure which it could have in the past. I think to a great extent now the window for application of that kind of pressure is closing. It is not closed completely, but certainly the opportunities are much less now than they used to be, because this kind of pressure also is dependent on the principle of diminishing returns. So what would have been much more effective 10 years ago will possibly be not as effective today. So that window of opportunity as far as the United States pressure is concerned on Pakistan has substantially closed. I think we also need to take into account the fact that the United States has a long history in Pakistan itself.
Okay.
And possibly that is a factor because of which there is a part of the strategic community which as I said, feels that Pakistan is not a country beyond the pale, but that it must be engaged with, and some links should be kept alive with it no matter what.
So this whole narrative that Blinken wants to build from here on, that US will reassess, revisit ties with Pakistan, go back to 20 years. Sushant Sareen, what does he really mean by that? Is this not a big window of opportunity if they really want to pull up the plug as far as Pakistan and its role in terms of supporting or harboring terror is concerned?
No, I think, yeah, and that is where I disagree. I agree with the analysis on what American motivation and the nuanced policy on Pakistan is that Ambassador Raghavan just spelled out. I don't have any quibbles on that. I completely agree with it. My disagreement is that I don't think that the window has closed, number one. Number two, I think the diminishing returns would set in maybe much later, but at this point in time, when you have the Pakistani rupee tumbling, you have the Pakistani foreign debt spiral out of control, you have runaway inflation in that country, you have all sorts of economic and financial problems and vulnerabilities which are coming out in the open. And I think the Pakistanis are really scared. Look, from the part of the country that I belong to, the Pakistanis are from the same part, right, which is Punjab. Very often when, you have the back to the wall, that is the time when you, do the maximum of bluff and bluster. That is what the Pakistanis are likely to do if the Americans give any indication that they're going to start turning the screws. What I don't agree with the Americans is that because of that nuanced policy which Ambassador Raghavan just spelled out, if the Americans are going to continue doing what they were already doing over the last so many years, then I don't think they will get results which are very different from the ones which they have got until now.
True.
So unless you want those results, yeah, you can do what Einstein always used to say is the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. I don't think they will get a different result. So if they want a different result, they have to change their assumptions on Pakistan and they have to change their policy on Pakistan.
Yes, change the policy on Pakistan. Will they do that? That's $1 million question. And how soon? Or perhaps they won't. Well, on that note, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. That's all we have time for discussion. As far as discussion is concerned, Ambassador Raghavan and Sushant Sareen, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. And now let's shift our focus to some more stories that we have lined up for you on Newsnight. Vice President and Rajya Sabha Chairman M. Venkaiah Naidu, Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla jointly launched Sansad TV on the occasion of International Day of Democracy. The Prime Minister termed the launch of Sansad TV a new chapter in the story of Indian democracy. In fact, he also greeted Doordarshan for completing 62 glorious years of its existence.
Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla launched Sansad TV in New Delhi on Wednesday. The new channel replaces the Lok Sabha TV and Rajya Sabha TV. The launch coincided with the International Day of Democracy. Speaking at the event, Vice President and Rajya Sabha Chairman M. Venkaiah Naidu said Sansad TV is expected to provide credible and reliable news and information.
Information with confirmation is more than ammunition. I am sure that the parliamentary television will provide information with confirmation.
Describing India as the mother of democracy, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, democracy for India is not just a system but an idea. He added that in a fast-changing world, the role of television and the media is rapidly evolving. He said that the 21st century is witnessing a revolution through news and broadcast.
21वीं सदी तो विशेष रूप से संचार और संवाद के जरिए रिवॉल्यूशन ला रही है। ऐसे में ये स्वाभाविक हो जाता है कि हमारी संसद से जुड़े चैनल भी इन आधुनिक व्यवस्थाओं के हिसाब से खुद को ट्रांसफॉर्म करें।
The Prime Minister expressed hope that Sansad TV will produce programs on grassroots democracy. He said these programs will give a new energy, a new consciousness to the democracy of India.
संसद टीवी की टीम ने इस दिशा में कई प्रोग्राम प्लान भी किए हैं। ये प्रोग्राम्स अमृत महोत्सव की भावना को जन जन तक पहुंचाने में काफी मदद करेंगे।
Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla expressed happiness at the launch of Sansad TV.
स्वतंत्रता प्राप्ति के 75 वर्ष पूर्ण होने जा रहे हैं, जिसके उपलक्ष्य में देश भर में हम आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव मना रहे हैं। राष्ट्रीय गौरव के ऐसे क्षण में आज संसद टीवी का शुभारंभ बेहद खुशी का मौका है।
The decision to merge two separate channels for two houses of parliament, Lok Sabha TV and Rajya Sabha TV, was taken in February this year. Sansad TV programming will primarily be in 4 categories: functioning of parliament and democratic institutions, governance and implementation of schemes, policies, history and culture of India, and issues, interest, concerns of contemporary nature. Earlier in the day, Prasar Bharati signed an MOU with Sansad TV for collaboration in broadcasting and content sharing. With Rishi Kumar, Bureau Report, DD India.
In fact, Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla has called for strengthening the democracy. He was addressing virtually the 81st All India Presiding Officers Conference in the backdrop of the International Day of Democracy, which is observed on 15th of September every year. The conference is aimed at deliberating the role of legislature in fostering effective and meaningful democracy.
हमने वैश्विक मंचों से जुड़कर संपूर्ण विश्व में लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों के पोषण, संरक्षण और संवर्धन के लिए अग्रिम भूमिका निभाने का संकल्प लिया है। मुझे आशा है उन संकल्पों एवं प्रतिबद्धताओं को पूर्ण करने की दिशा में विश्व के सभी देशों की संसदों द्वारा साझा प्रयास किए जाएंगे।
15th September is the foundation day of Doordarshan. 62 years have been completed since the establishment of Doordarshan way back in 1959. It has 36 satellite channels besides providing free-to-air DTH service, having 110 in its bouquet. The first telecast of Doordarshan was started on 15 September 1959 as educational and development program on an experimental basis. At that time, broadcast was only for half an hour, 3 days a week. Then it was named Television India, and later in 1975 it was renamed as Doordarshan in Hindi. This Doordarshan name became so popular that Hindi became synonymous with TV. And Narendra Modi, Honorable Prime Minister, also extended his greetings on the foundation day of Doordarshan.
आज दूरदर्शन की स्थापना के भी 62 वर्ष पूरे हुए हैं। ये बहुत लंबी यात्रा है। इस यात्रा को सफल बनाने में अनेकों लोगों का योगदान रहा है। मैं दूरदर्शन के संचालन से जुड़े सभी लोगों को भी बधाई देता हूं।
In fact, Prasar Bharati CEO Shashi Shekhar Vempati has expressed his gratitude to Prime Minister Narendra Modi for congratulating him on the foundation day of Doordarshan. He tweeted, and I quote, "Thankful to Honorable Prime Minister for his words of encouragement and wishes to not just staff of Doordarshan but to entire broadcast fraternity in India, especially engineers, specialists and technical staff who work behind the scenes making our democracy vibrant." Unquote. Director General of Doordarshan, Mayank Agarwal, has also expressed his gratitude towards Prime Minister Modi by tweeting, and once again I quote, "Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister, for your inspiring words and wishes on the occasion of Doordarshan's Foundation Day. We are sure that we will continue to adhere to the highest standards of public broadcasting." The 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly opened at UN headquarters on New York on Tuesday. Maldivian diplomat Abdullah Shahid, who was elected as president of the 76th UNGA in June, took oath of office during the ceremony and received a gavel from Volkan Bozkır, president of the 75th UNGA. In his speech, Shahid said his presidency will highlight hope in recovering from COVID-19, rebuilding sustainability, responding to the needs of planet, respecting the rights of all people, revitalizing the United Nations. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warmly congratulated Shahid of the Maldives on his election. The UN chief has called for the end of war against each other, stressing the urgency to fight against the humanity's common enemy, that is COVID-19 pandemic. From September 21st, over 80 heads of state and senior officials are expected to attend a high-level general debate of the UNGA. Yet another billionaire entrepreneur is set to ride into space this week, strapped inside the capsule of a SpaceX rocket ship as part of an Astro tourist team poised to make history as the first all-civilian crew launched into the Earth's orbit. A successful mission would also help usher in a new era of commercial space tourism. The SpaceX flight is designed to carry its 4 passengers where no all-civilian crew has gone before into the Earth orbit.
The crew of a SpaceX rocket ship, who hope to be the first civilians to attempt Earth orbit, said on Tuesday that they feel grateful to be a part of the historic mission a day ahead of their prospective launch. The so-called Inspiration 4 mission will blast off from the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Once in Earth orbit, the vehicle will circle the globe once every 90 minutes at more than 27,360 kilometers per hour, or roughly 22 times the speed of sound. The target altitude is 575 kilometers beyond the orbits of the International Space Station or even the Hubble Space Telescope. Billionaire entrepreneur Jared Isaacman will lead the other 3 fellow spaceflight novices on a 3-day trip from Cape Canaveral to splashdown in the Atlantic. The crew vehicle, dubbed Resilience, was set for liftoff with a 5-hour targeted launch window that opens 8 p.m. EDT on Wednesday, which translates to 5:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time on Thursday.
Some great contributions that are coming out of there, but if we're going to, go to the moon again and we're going to go to Mars and beyond, then we got to get a little outside of our comfort zone and take that, next step in that direction. So that was really the rationale.
The Inspiration 4 crew will have no part to play in operating their spacecraft. Isaacman, who is rated to fly commercial and military jets, has assumed the role of mission commander, while Proctor, 51, once a NASA astronaut candidate herself, has been designated as the mission pilot. She was selected to join the team through an online contest.
There have been 3 black female astronauts that have made it to space, and knowing that I'm going to be the 4th means that I have this opportunity to not only accomplish my dream, but also inspire the next generation of women of color and girls of color, and really get them to think about reaching for the stars and what that means.
Rounding out the crew are Chief Medical Officer Haley Akrinox, 29, a bone cancer survivor, and Mission Specialist Chris Sembrowski, 42, a U.S. Air Force veteran and aerospace data engineer. 4 crewmates have spent 5 months making rigorous preparations, including altitude fitness, centrifuge, microgravity and simulator training, emergency drills, classroom work and medical exams. SpaceX is easily the most well-established player in the burgeoning constellation of commercial rocket ventures. Rival companies Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin both recently celebrated their debut astro-tourism missions with their respective founding executives, billionaires Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, each going along for the ride. Bureau Report, DD India.
In other news, South Korea successfully tested a submarine-launched ballistic missile on Wednesday as it aims to better counter North Korea's growing capabilities. South Korea's missile test came the same day as North Korea fired a pair of ballistic missiles off its east coast, breaching UN sanctions and ratcheting up tension just days after testing a cruise missile with possible nuclear capabilities. President Moon Jae-in attended an underwater ejection test of the SLBM aboard the new 3,000-ton class Dosan An Changho submarine. which was commissioned last month. Moon said that the SLBM test has been planned and was not in response to the North Korea's launches, and this test would make South Korea's the first country without nuclear weapons to develop such a system. Other countries that have tested or developed SLBMs include US, Russia, China, Britain, France, North Korea and India. They have typically designed them to carry nuclear weapons. More international news. Taiwanese fighter jets landed on a makeshift runway on a highway strip on Wednesday as annual drills reached their peak. Skills that would be needed in the event China attacks and targets Taiwan's vulnerable air bases. Overseen by President Tsai Ing-wen, various military aircraft landed in rural southern Pingtung County on a highway strip specially designed to be straight and flat for a rapid conversion from a road into a runway. The week-long Han Kuang drills are taking place around Taiwan, with other exercises to practice repelling a Chinese invasion, protecting critical infrastructure and night operations. And with that, it's time to wrap up this edition of Newsnight. Meanwhile, we'll be back tomorrow, same time. I'll take your leave, me and my entire team. Thank you so much for tuning in. Namaskar.